Hey, this is Danny from Scare Talk. Before we get into all the horror greatness, I gotta let you know about Anchor. Anchor is the host site that we use to record our podcast. Anchor will upload your podcast to Apple and Spotify and many other listening platforms. Anchor is completely free, and you can download the app or go to the website, anchor.fm, and you can record straight on there. There's also some cool editing tools that you can use. Did I mention that it's free? Yeah, so if you want to make a podcast, Anchor is the way to go. Go check it out. Now, for the spooky stuff.
Welcome to Scare Talk, a horror movie podcast for horror fans. This podcast will cover horror movie reviews, ratings, and rankings. Now for your hosts, Danny and Joel.
All right, this is Scare Talk. I am Danny, and I'm here with Jason Voorhees Joel.
Hey guys, what's up?
And we have a very special guest, the writer-director of Never Hike Alone and Never Hike in the Snow.
Who is actually Jason Voorhees in those? So.
Oh, yes, true. We have Vincent DiSanti.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This is going to be awesome. So if anybody doesn't know, which you should if you're a horror fan, especially if you're a Friday the 13th fan, Never Hike Alone and Never Hike in the Snow are both very successful fan films for the Friday the 13th franchise. I believe Never Hike Alone has over 3 million views on YouTube, and Never Hike in the Snow has over 1 million now in about a year. So, doing very well.
Yeah.
So Vincent, we want to ask you about all of that stuff, but can you give us some of your background and what you're currently up to?
Yeah, like you guys said, my name is Vincent DiSanti. I'm a filmmaker. I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm based there now. I'm originally from Massachusetts, where I'm doing this podcast from. I'm visiting my parents for the Christmas and New Year's holiday. So it's good to be back home, back where it all started. For me, filmmaking really started here, like where I'm at right now. I grew up in the woods out here, grew up on a little lake, a little town called Westport, Massachusetts. And I grew up loving horror films. And I went to college for broadcast journalism. I ended up switching over to a film major about halfway through, realizing that if I wanted to tell fiction, I might as well just make movies. So I ended up studying to be a filmmaker, work in TV production, mostly spent my time in an editing booth learning how to edit it. And then I got out of college and I had no prospects here. So I ended up moving to Los Angeles in around 2008, and since then I've worked in the film industry in some way, shape, or form in many different ways. I got my start in feature animation, where I worked on a few feature films like Freebirds and Rock Dog, and another one called Duck, Duck, Goose. Probably spent about 8 years in feature animation, which also included some time in VFX and doing commercials. And towards the end of my career in animation was when I wanted to do live action films. I hadn't done one yet. It's why I moved to Los Angeles, but that's not where kind of the hands of fate really took me at first. Eventually I left animation to do the Never Hike Alone films, which were supposed to be 5-minute shorts. We were going to come up with a really kind of clever idea and try to put it on YouTube and see if it kind of caught fire. And of course, after about like a year and a half of working on it and doing all these things, we ended up making an hour-long feature that debuted at the Telluride Horror Show and released online at the same time on YouTube. And like you guys had said, has since gone on to get 3 million views. And after that happened, I made my full transition into live-action filmmaking. So I started working in something called the Assistant Directors Department. as different things as a first AD, a second AD. I've worked as a PA, all sorts of things. And yeah, jumped right in. I've done a lot of commercials. I've worked on Hallmark movies, Lifetime movies. I've also worked on big TV shows like The Rookie. I just got done working for a show called Chad on TBS. I did a couple episodes of American Horror Stories this year, which was really cool. It was one of my first horror projects that I got to work on.
Nice.
Yeah, I've sort of bounced all over the globe, sort of doing this, and with a focus on, wanting to direct, wanting to write, produce. I run a company called Womp Stomp Films that I basically just run out of my apartment. That's the company that we use to create the Never Hike Alone films and other things, like we've got another one, Imagine. We have another one coming out next year called Judy, directed by a friend of mine, Renee Vivas. The Pathosis film is directed by a good friend of mine, Austin Bonang. I'm doing an animated project called Ghost Chicken. So there's a lot of stuff that I work on in my personal life that allows me to scratch my creative itch. And then I have my professional life, which I do a lot of logistics on set, help basically what assistant directors do is they help get the day done. We work with the director in every single department on set to make sure that when we show up to shoot 5.5 pages of script, we are shooting 5.5 pages of script within a 12-hour block window. And if not, we're in big trouble. So sort of a rundown of who I am and what I do.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of responsibility there for making sure things get done.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a lot of spinning plates. And for the most part, you're going around just telling people what to do. But having a good knowledge of each department, what they do, what they're responsible for, what the ins and outs are, can really help you sort of work with everybody to get the day done versus working against departments because you don't understand how they're structured or how they work. You can often tell when, those steps of film school or someone's career have been sort of looked over because they just see that department as we just say things and things get done, versus understanding the reality of the situation and what a department needs to do to get it ready for a shot. So having an understanding of that, especially from an assistant director and a director, really is a vital part of the job.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see that. There's so much that goes into, whether it be a commercial or, an episode of a TV show or whatever, that a lot of people don't know about. And, a lot of different roles that go into even a half hour, feature. So,
totally.
It's cool to learn about those things. I love having different guests on here that can give some insight to that. So, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the cast and everything like that, like there's usually minutes worth of like credits to, not just like the actors, but to like everybody involved, and how many different people it takes to make a project successful. So it's
and most of those people with very hyper specific duties on set that are extremely important, and it really takes a village. I mean, films are made by, at least for the most part, if you're on a film, you're looking at around 50 to 100 people on set sometimes, just to get certain shots done. It depends on where you're shooting. It depends on, what you're shooting, how many people are in the shot. Is it a big stunt sequence? Is it a dialogue sequence? Is it, whatever it may be, you're still looking at all these different departments that come together and work together in order to make, ultimately this film that, even when they're done on that day, still has to go through a whole post-production process through a whole another set of teams that all are individually, focused on either, cutting the picture or coloring the picture or doing the sound and doing the sound design versus the sound mix and the visual. And don't even get me started on the visual effects, the unbelievable amount of visual effects people in departments that go just to make one frame of film. I mean, it could take up to 50 people to do one frame and make it look realistic. So it's, films really are, like I said, the product of a village. It takes a village to make any type of product like that.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so let's talk about Never Hike Alone. We can start there. Mm-hmm. So, Friday the 13th, why did you choose that franchise to make a fan film?
I mean, it came from my fandom. I mean, fan films should be made by fans. I think anyone who jumps into doing a fan film and they're not a fan of the product, it usually shows pretty much right away. They don't understand the lore, they don't understand the characters, and they specifically don't understand the fans. But for me, it was, like I said, I grew up out here in Massachusetts in the woods. Kind of reminded me of the first few Friday the 13th. I mean, technically I only grew up, 4 hours away from New York and New Jersey. I probably could have driven out there if I would have known where those locations, if I had internet when I was that young.
Right.
But for me, it was just, I grew up loving those films. I grew up loving the Jason character. It really started with me just trying to build a cosplay costume and take some good photos of it and maybe make a little bit of a short, just to have fun. And it wasn't until we discovered an actual abandoned camp in the forest of Big Bear that we realized that there was an opportunity there to tell a bigger story, that we had the luxury of being able to have access to a place that allowed us to have a $1 million film set. I mean, these were fully structured buildings that we could design the interiors however we wanted. We sort of had carte blanche with the locals to just kind of go up there and do what we needed. And as long as we didn't make a mess or destroy anything or burn anything down, they were going to basically let us do whatever we wanted. And so, putting it together piece by piece, it's, like I said, it started as a 5-minute idea, grew into a 20-minute idea. And then the more we went up there, I would look at a new piece of set and be like, you know what, there's a scene that could happen here. We came up with the idea of doing the red ribbons, which were callbacks to the first film, as if those crime scenes from the first Friday the 13th from 1979, it was released in 1980, but from that year, that if no one ever went back and no one ever cleaned up the camp, then there's a possibility that those crime scenes could remain there for all time. And so we went with the notion that it was never, that forest, Camp Forest Green wasn't technically where Camp Crystal Lake was, that was built somewhere else. And the original camp was untouched and still survived to this day. And that's where Jason, after all these years of being missing, had gone to hide. Okay. And that what type of story would it be like if you happen to be hiking through the woods one day, you stumble across Camp Crystal Lake, and then you bump into Jason Voorhees? Could you survive? So based on that premise, we felt like we had a really good formula. We sort of borrowed from the 127 Hour and The Martian, style of filmmaking, Danny Boyle and Ridley Scott. I think that they both had a good sort of strategy for how they covered those films, allowing a character to talk to the camera, and then when they're done talking to the camera, take the camera out of their hands and then give it to the cinematographers and shoot a movie. There had been discussion at the time, or maybe a few years before I had done it, about doing a found footage Friday the 13th, and I remember being a big proponent against it. I didn't want to see a found footage Friday the 13th film. I wouldn't even know how it would work. And in the process of making this film, I sort of realized this is the found footage film that would work. This is how you do Friday the 13th found footage. You don't make it full found footage all the time. You have to do something like this. And, based on those based on all of that and my love for Friday, I just started writing this story and working with my friends. And it was really just about, 5 of us. It was me, Andrew Lady, who plays Kyle McLeod, Kyle Klein, who was the producer, Chris Ellis, who was a cinematographer, J.D. Martz, who was the other cinematographer, and then a good friend of ours, Jonathan Carrera, who was our swing guy. He took care of camera stuff, he did drone stuff, he did lighting stuff, and so he was sort of all hands on deck. And from that core team, we started working every weekend on it, and building it up until we had a team of 35, 40 people, and we were shooting out in the woods with big 4K lights and stunt pads and all these different things. And it really sort of grew into this thing that was way bigger than we ever thought it would be.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in your, you said that it started with a 5-minute project. In that 5-minute project, did you always have Tommy Jarvis come back? Because I just watched it again today, back to back, both of the movies. I'd seen them previously before, but I wanted to freshen up my knowledge of the movies. And towards the end of the movie, he's in the ambulance, and you hear one of I forgot what her name was, but she calls for Tommy. And I was like, that's too much of a coincidence to have the name Tommy in a Friday the 13th fan film and not have it be Tommy Jarvis. So I looked it up, and yeah, it was the same Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th Part 6, which I thought was really cool. And to like sort of add him into the mix here. So he wasn't an original part of what you saw of your vision?
No, I mean originally it was really supposed to be really clean cut about, you know, a guy going into campus like running into Jason, almost getting away, and then getting killed at the last minute. And in fact, I would say the opening of Never Hike in the Snow is basically the original Never Hike Alone, but set in the snow. Same death and everything. I mean, the axe to the mouth was actually one of the first deaths I ever came up with for the series. And as we were penning out the film, you know, we started to expand it, and we started going after crowdfunding. And through crowdfunding, I met an executive producer by the name of Barry J. He came on and helped us out financially really early on in the project before we were even ever funded on Kickstarter. In fact, our first Kickstarter failed. And, you know, between Barry, myself, my family, you know, everybody kind of came and chipped in, and we raised the first $20,000 in order to shoot the first half of the film. And with the first half of the film completed, we went into the winter months sort of, you know, trying to figure out what we had left to shoot. What, you know, we had a lot of trial and error that fall too, so there was a lot sort of to be learned and figured out. And in the process of while we were trying to figure out, Barry hit me up one day and he was like, "Hey, you know, I met somebody who knows Tom Matthews who's going to, you know, set me up on a dinner with him as like a favor." Just as like a fan of Friday the 13th, he agreed to sort of go out on this like fan dinner type thing and for Barry's birthday. And Barry's like, "I'm going to mention Never Hike Alone." I was like, "Oh, that's embarrassing." Like, I'm sure he's going to hear fan film and like eyes are going to roll out of the back of his head. And so, you know, to Barry's credit, he went, you know, he had a dinner, and at the end of the dinner, he mentioned Never Hike Alone. And, you know, Tom really wasn't sort of interested, and I really didn't have a part for Tom at that point. The ambulance scene was sort of in a very early stage, and I was trying to figure out how to put it together, and it was actually supposed to, if all went originally planned, like everybody would have died, and that would have been, again, the original ending of Never Hike Alone, where everybody dies, and that's the end of the story. And, you know, Tommy... but Barry didn't know this, and he just pitched to Tom, "Hey, why don't you come meet this kid? Maybe he can find a role for you in the movie." And so I think Tom sort of showed up expecting me to pitch him like, "Hey, I need you to be in this movie and do all these things." And I sort of was like, "Listen, Tom, like I got half this movie shot. I don't have enough money to go and rewrite this entire thing and weave you through it and do all these things. But here's where I think you can work. I have this scene I'm writing. It's got an ambulance driver. I'm thinking you play the ambulance driver. You have a cameo. Everybody dies. It's great." And he's like, "Well, if you got Tommy, use Tommy." And I was like, "Are you sure that you want me to take control of this character? Because, you know, it means a lot to the fans, and I wouldn't want to screw it. I wouldn't want to screw it up." And he's like, "Nah, man." He's like, "Let's do it." And so, you know, he basically ended up signing onto the film because he saw the rest of the footage. He saw that he saw the trailers and was sort of like realized that, oh, this isn't your typical fan film. There's something a little bit more here. And so what I told Tom was that we're going to keep it a complete secret. He is the sort of surprise at the end of the movie, and to let him just be that. So that way he doesn't have to worry about doing too much Tommy stuff. He just has to do a little bit. He still gets one over on Jason, but his story is to be told later. And if this does well, maybe we can go talk to some studios and maybe we can get some stuff done and see what goes from here. So yeah, flash forward to October 17th, we released the movie, and everybody sees Tom's in it, and it was a really great day for fans, I think, because they weren't expecting it. I mean, first of all, I don't think that they were expecting a fan film to be even close to watchable. And the fact that it was cinematic, the fact that it had, you know, all these different things going for it, and then at the end of the movie, Tommy Jarvis shows up. I mean, I think that for them, that was a big, that was a big moment. And, it was a big moment for me as a filmmaker and as an entertainer to be like, wow, I really did something for fans. This is something that fans won't soon forget. And I got to do something for Friday the 13th. This is really cool. It might be unofficial, but this is my favorite franchise. I've always wanted to make a Friday the 13th film. In fact, when I moved to Los Angeles, my one dream was to work on a Friday the 13th movie. Was, whether it was getting coffee or, scooping up the blood after a kill. I didn't care whatever it was. I just wanted to be out there.
You need to direct one of these movies once they figure the whole court system thing out. The rights.
And isn't that the funny thing? Because, if you had ever met me before any of this, I don't think anyone would have said, well, Vincent DiSanti needs to direct a Friday the 13th film. Yeah. And I would have been the guy just happy to be working on it. And it wasn't until I realized that, the opportunity is not really coming anytime soon. And why don't I take this small opportunity to do something for myself? I'll give myself the opportunity to work on a Friday the 13th movie. And, doing that and following that put me in a position to where, like, hey, it might not happen, but more people are saying that Vincent DiSanti should direct a Friday the 13th film than ever in the history of time. So I think that sort of works.
Yeah, that's saying something for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's really impressive, and we interviewed Dave McRae. I'm not sure if you heard of him, but he did the It's Me, Billy, the
of course.
Black Christmas, fan film. And I feel like fan films are getting pretty popular right now, and you guys are kind of, doing this cinematic experience. It's not just someone on their phone making a movie. It's legit. Like, there's, great score, great sound design, great, that location that you guys were able to come across is great. Like, the even the inside of the buildings, I'm like kind of transported back into the 80s. Even inside the buildings, I'm like, okay, like that it looks like a mess hall. That seemed very familiar. Even though it was, all run down and abandoned, it still felt like Camp Crystal Lake. So that was really cool.
Well, it has its own, unique design to it. That camp sort of doesn't match anything else from the previous films, but it sort of had that spirit.
Yes.
And I remember when I first walked in there, and I sort of like realized, I was like, I would believe that Camp Crystal Lake would look like this, because this is so, I don't know. It's magical, honestly. Standing in that room is a magical feeling, especially when, like, just the way we filmed it too, with the sun coming through the windows, and there's a little bit of musk in the air, and you can see the beams, and everything's just like been there for decades, and that hasn't been touched. And so, it sort of like makes you feel like you're there. And I think that Andrew did a great job of making the audience feel like they were there. I feel like Chris and JD did a great job of capturing the camp in a way that was cinematic, that made it feel sort of real, in that sense that, it might not look like anything else from the films, but it didn't matter, because, in my opinion, I think that this aesthetic is probably one of the most cinematic that Camp Crystal Lake itself has ever looked. And if you look at, some of the Friday the 13th from along the way, they all have very specific, memorable sets. The sets have very unique designs, whether it be Packanack or Higgins Haven or the Jarvis House, even Forest Green to a certain degree. They have a very unique shape language. And so as long as there's something there in the production design world that's done well and it stands out, it sort of helps even though Jason is always in a different place, you believe that this place is real because it has things you can recognize in that sense. Okay. And so we just sort of took full advantage of that and did the best we could with what was basically given to us by the Force.
Yeah, that's really it's like meant to be that you guys stumbled across that place, because I couldn't think of a better location. So is Friday? So you got Tommy Jarvis from Friday 6. Is that your favorite of the Friday franchise, or which one would you say is your favorite?
Yeah, Friday the 13th Part 6 is my favorite Friday the 13th film by far.
Okay.
It's the one I grew up watching the most, idolizing Tom Matthews. And I just love that film. It's got everything that sort of like took it to the next level. There was, bigger, it was it was a bigger production behind it, but the ending of the film, the way Jason looked, all that stuff, it just used to scare the crap out of me. And I love the first 4 films, and I love Friday the 13th Part 5 too, and I really love 4 through 6, the Tommy Jarvis saga, which I could watch in like one sitting. The story of Tommy is sort of what I love the most. So like 4 and 6 are my 2 favorites, and then you throw 2 in there as well, are my top 3. So it goes 6, 4, 2, just like that.
Okay, yeah. A lot of fans love number 4. And then, Jason Lives. A lot of people love that one too. So, man, that's awesome. Okay, so how did you get the cast? Were these just friends of yours, or did you have to do any sort of rehearsing, or what happened there?
A lot of it was through friends. It was through working on other projects. It was meeting people on other projects. I knew Andrew through animation. We worked on a film called Rock Dog together. He was one of my production assistants. He only worked part-time. He was the son-in-law of the producer, and I met him, and he would come down a few times a week, just to help out around the office, really. And we got to talking one day, and both discovered that we loved horror movies. And I asked him if he wanted to make a Friday the 13th movie. He said yes and never looked back. Chris and Kyle I had met on other films. He worked as a coordinator for me a few years. And of course, he, as soon as I said, hey, we're going to go do this, he was down. I met Chris and John through another project, working on a friend's 48-hour film project. Showed them some photos of the costume that I had built at the time, which wasn't the Ghost Jason costume. It was another costume, but it was a good photo. The costume looked decent. And they were like, yeah, man, we're in. Like, let's go figure something out. So from there, sort of our core little group started designing everything. And we did that first trailer, which we released in May of 2016. You can find it on our YouTube page. It's, Never Hike Alone trailer number 1. And, we don't even have the ghost hawk yet, but that was sort of like the original idea that launched everything, was just this like really kind of like, we had a whole nother set of cabins that we were going to shoot at. We were shooting on this trail behind my house, which ended up in the film anyway. And it was, like I said, it was based on that 5-minute idea. And it wasn't until we shot that first trailer that we met the people who, when you watch the first trailer, there are cabins that the character walks around that don't appear in the final film. Oh, gotcha. And those are down the street from where we had found the other camp, because the people who lived in those cabins were like, why are you shooting here? And we're like, well, it's got a camp vibe. It looks really good. We didn't realize people lived here because I'd never seen anyone here. But we're just filming down by the river, and kind of like, this little creek that was over there. Like, we're just walking around. We'll be in and out of here because most of this film takes place in the woods. And they're like, no, you guys should go shoot at a camp if you're going to make a Friday the 13th film. We're like, yeah, well, we don't really have the money, and it's just not that sort of film. We don't have any funding. And they're like, no, you don't understand. Go up the road. They showed me a map. They were like, if you go right here, like, this is where it is. There's like a whole camp. It's all intact. And even then, I didn't believe them. It was too good to be true. You know what I mean? I'm thinking like, there's going to be like the shell of a building. It's going to be covered in graffiti. It's not going to look good. Like, in fact, even as a rundown camp, I can't imagine Camp Crystal Lake having any ounce of graffiti in there. Like, I wanted it to be like, I feel like graffiti would have made it not scary.
Yeah.
Like, seeing graffiti means that people have come up here and got away. So how scary could it really be? You know what I mean? Right. So when we get up there and we found this fully intact, yeah, exactly. So so when we got up there and we found fully intact buildings, no graffiti, everything was like, basically the only thing we had to do was take, like, they even had the boards on the windows still covering up the windows. So we had to take the boards off the windows so we could let light in. And as soon as we did that, like, it was like the place came alive. And it was this surreal feeling. And like, even walking down to like the kids' cabins and some of the other places we didn't even shoot, it was just like, there's almost too much here. I wish there was a way to like, pare some of this down and do this or that. I mean, we literally would cut walls off of other buildings and drag them to other places to create other sets, just so we could make it work and work it for the film. But it was like, having the camp, like, and it was like having your own fort. I mean, that's the only way I could explain it. Like, we would go up every weekend. We had a little secret room that we kept all of our stuff in, and it was a 2-hour drive there, a 2-hour drive back. So it was like Friday night, we got into a van, drove 2 hours up, jumped in our Airbnb, got up real early on Saturday morning and just started shooting. And that was like that for every weekend, all fall of 2016. And like some weekends were big, some weekends were small. Sometimes we had 25 people, sometimes we had 5 people. And it was just a matter of saying like, okay, what section of the script are we going to get this weekend? What are those elements that we need? And if there was any missing element that we had, it was going to our core group of friends that were helping us do this and say, do you know a stunt coordinator? Do you know a person that could do this? Do you know a person that could do that? And again, through working on other films and, working with other people, I had met Brian Forrest, who's my stunt double for Jason Voorhees. And I approached him first. I said, hey, do you want to stunt coordinate this? Because I knew he had done some stunt coordination. And he was like, no, this is above my pay grade. Like, you're going to need someone who's like legit. And I know somebody who's legit. And so I was introduced to Jessica Aaron Bennett. I was introduced to Kelsey Burke through a series of visual effects artists who all dropped out of the film, who were like, whatever. And nobody was really taking it seriously. And then this girl, Kelsey, showed up and she absolutely hit it out of the park. I mean, we couldn't have asked for anyone better. And she's like amazing at what she does. And what she does right now is like she's working on, she worked on Midnight Mass, she worked on Swamp Thing.
Nice.
She's worked on the biggest films that are out there right now. I mean, if you go follow her on, I think it's like Kay Burke or something like that on Instagram, you see the stuff that she does. It's insane. We were so lucky to have her. And so it was a lot of that. And so like, basically every single role got filled that way. We all reached out and found people and slowly built our team. And so Womp Stomp Films went from me and 5 other people to, now I could say safely that there are between 50 and 75 people on our roster that when we need to, we can access to them in any shape or form in any department. So it's a pretty cool growth that we've had since we've gotten started in 2016.
Yeah, great. So speaking of Jason, I love what you guys did with him. You played him for a good chunk of the movie, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about it's like 60-40, I would say.
Okay.
Like when I think I put in the years of sort of building that costume and shot a lot of stuff that didn't end up in the film, stuff that we cut out still. But at the end of the day, like what shots were used, depending whether or not, like I did a lot of the same shots, but sometimes it was like, no, this was the shot that was more in focus. If Brian's in the suit, not a big deal.
Yeah.
We really do share that role. I mean, we just make it me to make it simple, and we give him the stunt credit,
Gotcha.
just to make it like a simple, clear. But verbally, I'm always like, listen, me and Brian are like neck and neck with screen time. It's and that's the good part. You never know who's in it. And if we can do that, you can't tell. It's like, oh, this is definitely Vinny, or oh, that's definitely Brian. Like, then we've done our job. It's like, Mandalorian, and then like Pedro Pascal's maybe in the suit for maybe 2 shots.
Yeah.
Only when he takes his helmet off. Other than that, it's a stunt guy. And then like I would feel bad if I didn't give Brian his due anytime he does it, because he comes in, he does a lot of the stuff that any time there's like a real danger of me getting physically hurt. Our stunt coordinator is very adamant about saying, I can't be in the costume, because if I go down and I go to the hospital, that's the end of everything.
Mm-hmm.
We can always suit me up and go if something happens to Brian, but let's go through Brian first. That's the reason why he's there. That's why we're paying him. So
right.
So Brian is the one who gets to kind of go in and do anything where like there's like big hits. He's taking shots, jumps, weapon work, things like that. Like he does a lot of that stuff, and I do a lot of like the acting and sort of more emotional moments. Definitely do a lot of that, even though he did a lot of the work with Lennon for the Miss Voorhees scene in Never Hike in the Snow. That's actually his wife, which is pretty funny. Yeah, that's how she see how we cast. We just stay in house. We just stay in family, really. And so that, and then I'll do something. It's like so Brian is actually in Never Hike in the Snow. He plays Deputy Mabry.
Okay.
So obviously when he gets his head blown off, that's me in the costume. Yeah, so that's a couple of times where you can definitely tell who's in the costume and who's not. But like we switch costumes in between scenes with Jason in there, you can't tell who's who. So it's a lot of fun. And Brian's friggin' awesome at what he does.
Yeah. I definitely wouldn't have been able to guess that there was multiple people playing Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Something I really liked was the sound design with Jason walking around and stomping, and he's so loud. I love that. I love it. And I was watching it with headphones in, so I was getting the surround sound, Jason walk. But it's so intimidating, and I feel like, there's a good amount of the Friday films where Jason just wasn't too scary. He was kind of more of a fun character, but I feel like with what you guys brought to screen, he was scarier than quite a few of the Friday films. Some of the stuff you did with him, like in the background, and some of the sneaking around that he was doing, and popping up here and there when you didn't expect him, like that stuff is what makes Jason fun and good. When you can't really see him too much, and then he kind of is just there. So I appreciate that.
I think it's a combination of sort of like the way we made him look, and then the scenes that we put him in, like you said, like putting him in the background, letting him slowly present himself throughout the film, and then when he is on film, he's sort of like a freight train, and he's coming, and that there's this innate sense that this character has to get away. Like he has to keep running, he has to keep going, he has to keep fighting, he has to keep surviving. And I think in Friday the 13th, it really got into this lull where like you establish a character, does something, Jason pops out, they get hit with something, they die, the scene's over.
Yeah.
And that sort of relentless dread of him coming, that he could be around any corner, was sort of lost. And for me, growing up out here, that's how I always thought of Jason, was that he could be around any tree. He could reach out and grab my foot while I'm hiding in a bush. He could reach up and grab me out of the water if I was swimming on the surface of the lake. And where was Jason going to strike next? In fact, the early Friday the 13th video game was very effective with that. You could just be walking along, throwing rocks at zombies, when all of a sudden the screen would stop scrolling and then Jason would pop out. It would be intensely terrifying, especially when you're like only 10 years old. So it was sort of those experiences that like I had always held as the scariest things about Jason, but very rarely saw those executed in films.
Yeah.
And so when doing this, there was sort of like, I was just like legit tapping into my nightmare fuel. I was going into the places in my head that Jason scared me and coming up with scenarios that allowed Jason to come off intimidating and, cinematic and majestic and all these different things that I felt that like had sort of fallen to the wayside as he had become more and more of a pop culture icon.
Yeah.
And there was sort of like this the filmmakers were almost too aware that they were using Jason in the films rather than trying to create a scary character. They were just playing with Jason. And in my head, I was just trying to make him as scary as possible again.
Yeah. Oh, that's 100%. Yeah. Jason became like you said, a pop icon. And now, within the films that you've made, he's an icon. You use him in that way, the horror way, not just he's like a celebrity in a movie or something.
Yeah. There's Jason.
Yeah.
It's just those movies kind of became more about like the gore than actually making Jason be scary. And that's what.
But that was also the 80s too.
Sure.
Yeah, that was.
The 80s was really focused around. I mean, the 1980s were the time of the visual effects artists. That's when, even in the late 70s, you could say, when it really started to take off. But the 80s boom of visual effects was really where, a big part of our industry grew. The special effects industry grew immensely in that era, especially within the horror world anyway, because they were allowed to do so much more than they ever were before. And so with each movie, it was always about what more can we do? What else can we do? What else haven't we seen? And a lot of it, and another part of it was to like, what have we seen? What do we know works? Like, what do we know apparatuses actually are effective on screen and what aren't? And you started to see a lot of the same things because the reliable pieces of technology always found their way back to screen versus like the expensive experiment, which would go awry and not look that great. and it wasn't always and it wasn't always a guaranteed for success. Like, you could look at the fact that, like, how in part 8 are you making the worst face Jason has ever had?
Yeah.
Like, when you've got 7 other films prior to you that have done it in some way, shape, or form, and so it was very funny, like the way that it sort of kind of went up and down with that, depending on the budget and who was doing the makeup, and where the importance lies, and showing that, like, the difference between someone like John Carl Buechler doing the makeup. And I feel bad because I don't know the effects makeup artist for part 6 off the top. I mean, part 8 off the top of my head, but you see a degradation of work. Even though there are some cool things in part 8, it's just that in part 7 got cut down to the bone. And so you're probably you probably think about the producers thinking about it like, well, if they're going to cut out all the effects, why are we paying all this money for the effects?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Like, those are the conversations that happen, and like the producers aren't really thinking about what the fans want. All the producers need to do is stay on budget. They need to stay on schedule, and that's all they really care about. They're not emotionally or emotionally invested or fans of the product. They just know that the product makes money and they got to churn out another thing. The kids will love it type stuff.
Right.
They don't think about it. They don't think that, like, there was ever going to be a YouTube where we analyze every single frame of a film and then talk about it for hours on end. People used to just watch these films in 480p, before any type of HD, and they could get away with so much. And so it's kind of funny when you go back. Like, I always laugh. My friend always brags about, like, oh, I got the new 4K restoration of, like, some 80s horror film, and I'm like, you're gonna ruin it. Like, you're going to see all the strings. It's everything. The texture of the makeup's going to look awful. Like, they got away with it because it was on VHS. Like, don't give it any more than it already has from DVD. So
you never pause the VHS. It's always, like, really fuzzy and just, So there's always...
you got, like, 5 lines going through the screen, like, squiggling. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. That's so true. All right, so yeah, my favorite scene in Never Hike Alone is definitely the ambulance scene. Throwing Tommy in there, kind of connecting Never Hike Alone with the Friday franchise. In your mind, in your vision, when does Never Hike Alone take place? Is it like modern day? Are you taking out like Friday 8 or 7, or within the franchise? When does this take place?
So this would be like a series retcon of everything that's after New Line started. So it's basically eliminating all the New Line films because they diverted so far hard from the original canon. As crazy as 7 and 8 are in the series for Paramount, it still feels like a part of the same storyline. It feels like an extension of the previous movie. It picks up right after the previous movie. You see those connections and it feels connected. And Jason Goes to Hell for me was the first movie in the franchise that ever felt like it disconnected so far from the originals and sort of like the original formula that it didn't feel like a Friday the 13th to me. Like, it is a Friday the 13th film. It is a canon film, obviously. But I was like, whatever happened to that other Jason? Because this direction I do not like. And I always wanted to see sort of like, I wish I could go back and continue the story from there. And, Friday the 13th had been around the world so many times at that point, as far as like telling all these different stories and, the continuity and the logic and a lot of those things. So I think for me, it was sort of like, as long as those events happened in some way, shape, or form, 1 through 8, back in like and if you follow the original timeline, which starts in 1979 with the first film, well, technically 1957, but 1979. And then you take it up to about 2001, 2004, I think is when, 2001 is when technically Jason Takes Manhattan takes place. Believe it or not, even though it's definitely set in the 80s. But timeline-wise, it was sort of like, let's not take the films too seriously. Let's just take the films as markers in time. And then that was sort of the last time anyone ever saw Jason. And Jason sort of learned his lesson and went into hiding. Okay. And what happens if Jason really started to get better at hiding like he was in Friday the 13th Part 2, and sort of came back to Crystal Lake. Obviously, at the end of part 8, he's flushed out to sea. He's lost his mask. He's lost his clothes. He's a blank canvas, and he's this rotting corpse that returns to Camp Crystal Lake, sullenly defeated, and has to rebuild his life, and sort of like just rediscovers his mother's head, finds new clothes, finds a new hockey mask, and then has a new edict in life, which was, I'm going to stay out of sight. I'm not going to go after anybody unless they force me to, because I don't want to die again for the 50th time. Like, I've died 10 times. I've been burned. I've been stabbed. I've been hung. I've been shot. I've been all these different things. And none of it has stopped me. None of it has stopped this madness of this curse of me having to wake back up and teach these kids a lesson every single time that always ends with me getting back put in the earth and getting shot up and doing all these things. Like, I'm sick of it. Like, I'm old man Jason now. Like, this is enough. Like, toxic waste. Like, what's the next step?
Right.
So you can imagine that, like, so we made that Disappear music video, which is a part of our master cut, the ghost cut, which opens up the film. And it's sort of like Jason sort of coming to grips with the fact that this really is never going to end. That, like, this cycle of violence, this edict that I have from my mother to continue on the curse and to carry on the death curse is never going to stop. And that it's not fulfilling me. Like, it's not bringing my mother back. I'm not allowed to move on, and I'm just creating death and destruction wherever I go. Maybe I'm the problem. And so, Jason sort of like starts to sit out, and over the years, you can imagine that every now and then someone goes missing. And that's sort of where the story of Never Hike Alone came from, which was, now I want to start telling stories about the people who go missing and don't come back. What happened to them? When does Jason win? And that's really about what Never Hike in the Snow is about. Never Hike in the Snow is an instance of, like, these are all the things that need to take place for in order for Jason to exist. That, he needs to be hidden, that no one can get away, that he can stay hidden from Tommy, and that the police don't believe in him. And so if all of those elements can remain a focus up until Never Hike Alone, you can imagine that there have been several Mark Hills over the last 2 decades. But it just so happens that when we get to the Never Hike Alone story, that what makes Kyle MacLeod such a special character in the Friday the 13th world is the fact that he's the first one to get away. And, like, he's the first survivor in the modern age. And, and that's sort of going to undo everything that Jason has built over the last 2 decades of staying hidden and staying off the radar. And now all of a sudden, the Band-Aid's been ripped off, and Jason sort of has to return to his original form after that moment. But until then, what he's protecting is his secrecy. And when he no longer has his secrecy, that's when he's got nothing else to lose.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So, speaking of Never Hike in the Snow, this is a prequel, if I understand correctly, to Never Hike Alone, correct? Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah. I gotta say, I think I'm more of a fan of Never Hike in the Snow. I love them both, but I like some of the character development that you went with Snow. You got to know some of the other characters. The sheriff. Tommy is in there, and he's seen as this crazy guy who still thinks Jason is killing people and all this. I like the chemistry between the characters. There's more than basically one character in Jason in Snow, and it's only a half hour, so you really pack in a lot in a short amount of time. And the transitions from scene to scene are really cool. I was pretty impressed with that. Yeah,
I was just gonna say that it's amazing how long fans of the franchise have been wanting a Jason in the Snow type of a movie. It's been demanded for years, and we got a Jason Goes to Hell and a Jason in Space before we got a Jason in the Snow. And it's like, all right, well, one's probably a lot easier than the other ones. You could have just done the Snow one first. And then we also got a weapon used that I don't think ever seen Jason use, which was a bow and arrow in the beginning of that movie, which was a nice touch as well. Like I like that. He's using more than just his machete to kill people with. So,
in fact, I think he doesn't even. I mean, our Jason doesn't even, he uses a machete at one point to fight Kyle.
Yeah.
But and he lands a blow on Kyle with a couple blows with it, but he mostly uses the axe to kill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And obviously, I mean, we also see him use a shotgun.
Yeah.
Which technically, I mean, he doesn't use it. He makes the guy turn the shotgun on himself, and by the time he pulls the trigger, it's already under his chin. But but I think, to jump into that, like, Never Hike in the Snow was definitely, like, first of all, thank you. I mean, Never Hike in the Snow was a lot of work. We had a lot more funding on that one, and a lot of people were like, what do you mean you didn't make a feature film? It was like, well, the reason why we didn't make a feature film is we took all that funding and put it into every single frame of this film. I mean, with Never Hike in the Snow, the goal was to up the production value of the entire production, every single frame. Nothing like Never Hike in the Snow and Never Hike Alone, which is still great. And we were able to do a lot of things with like low budget cameras, no crew, we didn't really have much to do. Like this time we had to shoot in the snow, which was a big challenge. And, it kind of started with the fact that like, hey, we've never seen Jason in the snow before. We still have a lot of work to do on this Never Hike Alone 2 idea. I'm still trying to pitch it to the studios. I'm still trying to kind of do these other things. But in the meantime, we can make this snow short that could be a fun exercise and let us try some things out that show people that we can do not just like the singular found footage thing, but we can tell actual, story development. Let's make a pilot episode. Like, let's focus on making a good pilot. Let's introduce all these different characters, and that will launch the Never Hike Alone series, and it might give us a chance to like, run headfirst into a meeting and maybe turn this into an actual series on HBO Max or something. Mm-hmm. And so with that, I really kind of outlined it with that in mind, of the fact that it would be sort of like this, that was, it was half hour. So we knew that we could spend that. We took the money and said, all right, how much is it going to do the axe in the mouth gag? How much is it going to do this? How much is it going to do that? We were looking for around $50,000 to $60,000 in crowdfunding, so we could spend about maybe 30 to 40 on set. We ended up raising about $100,000, so that allowed us to add a couple of scenes. At the end of the day, I think what people need to know is that like we raised $100,000, but $10,000 caught right off the top. That went to Indiegogo. So we started with $90,000, and then about $30,000 of that, if not more, went into the crowdfunding materials. So building the Blu-rays, shipping to things all over the world. It never stops. And there's post-production, there's all these different things. So it wasn't like we had, a full $100,000 to work with. We had we actually had the same amount of money that we had for Never Hike Alone. But we were able to turn that into, but now we also had multiple actors that were SAG that we did have to pay. We had crew that we did have to go out and pay because it was certain things that they needed to do that, we were basically hiring on extra hands to help out. And we had our small crew that wasn't, the full-time crew that doesn't take any money. But there are people that we hire on to be like, listen, we want you on this project because we want to give the fans the best product that we can. So we're going to hire fringe people that run specific departments. So that way we have that quality on set, and we'll fill it in. Like, we'll save money by doing a lot of this work for free, and I'll invest it now in, this piece of special effects, and going out to people like the people who did the teeth for little young baby Jason. That was the same guy who did the teeth, the same exact guy who did the teeth for Pennywise in the new It.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we're not just getting like some guy off the street. Like, we're going after the people that are working on some of the biggest films in the industry, and they're working on our projects. The guys who built the blood rig for Never Hike in the Snow and Never Hike Alone, who did the exploding head, this guy Corey, he works on Halloween movies. And he builds the blood rigs for the Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends and all that stuff. And so, we work with people, and we, they give us discounts, and we're able to sort of build these different things and weave story around it. And I think for me, like, everything for Never Hike in the Snow was based upon that opening kill. Yeah. The original idea was just to maybe raise $10,000 and just do the opening kill and call it a day. And it wasn't until I started to think about that sort of like, oh, wow, like, we're killing this guy, but it's kind of sick when you think about it, right? I mean, this is somebody's wife. I mean, this is somebody's husband. This is, at the time we were like, this could be somebody's husband. This could be somebody's boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. And then, as I started to push the pieces around, I was like, no, this is somebody's son. This is some kid. Like, imagine if it's some kid, like, what's the fallout of this? And, like, what happens? And if this guy goes missing, this kid goes missing, what has to happen in order for Jason to get away with this? And what happens for Jason to get away? Because obviously there's, like, evidence left behind. And so it allowed us to, like, introduce the Rick Cologne character, which is also from Friday the 13th Part 6. I was introduced by Vinny through Tom after we made Never Hike Alone. Became really good friends with Vinny and asked him to be a part of it. So to bring his character back in, again, adds to that sort of realism of the story that we're telling, that this really does feel like Crystal Lake 20 years later after the events of of Jason Lives.
Yeah.
And that these are events these events happened in between, and these are legit story arcs for these characters, and we're connecting them piece by piece. And so far, we told Kyle's story. In the second film, we told, in the prequel, we're telling sort of Vinny's story and Mark's story and Jason's story. Sort of like these three, we're setting up the Diana character for her thing, and then in Never Hike Alone 2, it's sort of like it's all Tommy's perspective. And then we get to sort of see like what Tommy's been dealing with for 20 years and why he is sort of the way he is, and how why he got this job as an ambulance driver, and all these different things. But like for the fact that like we'll meet Tommy in a time before he meets Kyle MacLeod, and to realize that the events of Never Hike in the Snow still haunt him, and everything still haunts him. Jason still haunts him, but he can't find him. He's like Sasquatch. Like every time he goes into the forest, Jason's nowhere to be found. And if he tries to tell anybody that Jason exists, he's just called Crazy Ralph. You know what I mean? Like he's turning into another Crazy Ralph, and he's realizing slowly that if he continues down this path, that it could all be over for him. And so he sort of has to sort of keep to himself, and he sticks to himself. He's quiet, and then one day he gets a call to be out, to go pick up a lost hiker in the middle of the forest, and lo and behold, there's Jason, and the whole world comes crashing down around him. And after years of saying the wolf is in the woods, all of a sudden the boy comes home crying wolf, and he's got how many hours to get ready for Jason to basically attack everyone in town and take out as many people as he can.
So that's the idea for Never Hike Alone 2.
Yeah, so Never Hike Alone 2 is that, which was supposed to be 3 different films. We were going to do it as a series, and then the pandemic hit right after we got done filming Never Hike in the Snow, and sort of brought everything to a standstill. And as we started to regroup, we realized that like probably the best thing to do is put those films all back together, because it was originally just one film, and we sort of broke it up to kind of do the pitching and kind of go through that process. And obviously like the lawsuit like made it impossible. Like we did get to pitch, I did pitch it to a few different people. I did sit down with some different production companies and some distribution people, and got to shoot my shot for Friday the 13th, which is pretty cool. I mean, I sat in an office at Warner Brothers and was like, hey, here's what I think. And it went over really well. I mean, I had a lot of people say, like, obviously, I literally got told in the Warner Brothers office, they were like, if we were ever going to do this, you're definitely the person who needs to do it.
Nice.
You know more about this than anyone that I know. And I was just like, thank you. And, but they said, but unfortunately, there's a lawsuit going on, and there's nothing we can really do with it. And our mandate is to not touch anything Friday the 13th. Until we know, but we got you on file, and if anything ever comes up, we'll give you a call. So, awesome. I just got sick and tired of waiting, honestly, and I felt like this was now the time to do it. I have Tom, I have Vinny. They're not getting any younger. I'm not getting any younger. I got bills to pay. I can't like keep taking off months of time from work to do this. And if I'm going to do it, I got to do it now. So I started to sort of redevelop it, over this past year, knowing that I still had, from the pandemic, we had long delays for getting the Never Hike in the Snow Blu-ray out. There were material shortages. I had to wait extra months for all these different things. I was holding out to try and get the original clear cases that I wanted to get, and they never showed up. And, it was just one thing after the next. And then there were 3,500 Blu-rays to ship around the world. Which again, that was probably $16,000 to $20,000 worth of shipments.
Yeah.
Because of because of international shipping, because of, things that come back and get returned and all those different things. So, not 16, I think that was about 10. So it was about $10,000 extra that we had to hang on to, you know what I mean? So it wasn't, again, it's like we raised that money, but we have to be very careful with the way we spend it because, even a year and a half after we release the film, we still need part of those funds to get those things shipped out. So once we got finished shipping those Blu-rays, that's when it opened up the ability for us to be like, okay, now we can step into looking at Never Hike Alone 2. We actually did a version of the films where it cuts Disappear, Never Hike in the Snow, and Never Hike Alone into one master film, and actually adds a couple extra bonus scenes called the Ghost Cut, which we just released on Blu-ray, which I've been working on that over the break as well. So while I'm working on the Never Hike Alone Ghost Cut Blu-rays, I've also been rewriting Never Hike Alone 2 so it can be a feature that fits within a good budget that we think we can raise, and then turn around and give us the ultimate story arc that we want to conclude the story of Tommy and Jason and Kyle and Diana and Vinny.
So, my question was mainly about the lawsuit situation, because here it depends on the type of lawsuit it is, but typically you can use you can make a fan film, but you can't really use the names of Jason. You can't really use the names that are associated with the project or the series themselves. So, do you know what went into that lawsuit? Like, how are you able to basically use everything? You're basically making a Friday the 13th movie, using the same names of the people, of the characters in the series, while this lawsuit's going on about who's going to take over the whole series and everything. So I was just kind of curious about the whole process there.
Honestly, it really comes down to the license holders. So the lawsuit that's going on and what we're doing are two different things. Fan films fall under something called fair use, which something so pop culturally known that it's kind of hard for people not to talk about it or reference it or make fan films of it. As long as we're not making a profit off of it, as long as we're not taking it to I'm not selling it to Warner Brothers and saying, hey, here you go, give me $1 million for Never Hike Alone. Now go put this in theaters and we'll make money off of it while the people who actually made Friday the 13th get paid nothing. That it can't work that way. That's what they don't want to happen. As far as people creating a Friday the 13th fan film, sticking it on YouTube for people to watch it for free, really doesn't hurt anybody. And so when it comes to fan films and the rules of fan films, there are a few of them. I won't go too deep, but it's basically just don't pretend that you're the product you're portraying. Make sure it's clear this is a fan film. Because if you do that, that's a really good first step. Don't make profit off of it. And when I say profit, I mean actually having money left over at the end. If you want to raise $75,000, $100,000, $200,000 to make a film, good for you. Just make sure that at the end of filming, you've spent every last dollar and that, the fans get what they want. If, you say the film's not finished, but all of a sudden you're going on a vacation to Tahiti, people might start asking questions. There's that. And then there's, depending on what franchise you're working on, like Star Trek. In Star Trek, you can't raise over $50,000. There's different rules, but it really comes down to who owns the franchise and how do they feel about fan films. And so, quoting Steve Cunningham and Victor Miller, when it comes to fan films, they legit do not give a shit. They do not care. They don't understand them. They're like, you guys do whatever you want. It's your bag. They're just worried about the actual films and the films that make money. And so the basic lawsuit, for anyone who doesn't know what happened to Friday the 13th, is basically there's a statute in the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, that allows a writer that after, I think it's 35 years have passed since the original project has been released. So in this case, Friday the 13th, the original film, as the writer of that script, he can appeal to regain the rights of the characters and rights of the film after that 35th year. as long as there are certain things that aren't in place. And so he did that. And Sean Cunningham sued him to say, no, you can't do that because you were work for hire, which basically says, like, I came up with Friday the 13th. I hired you to write Friday the 13th, and you wrote that for me, and I own it. And so I think because what happened was Sean could never produce the paperwork that said Victor was work for hire. So the judge had to default to say that Victor had written this script on his own called A Long Night at Camp Blood, and that he was owed, anytime a film gets made in the United States, the domestic rights of Friday the 13th, that the characters of Jason Voorhees, the young boy who drowned, Pamela Voorhees, the mother who returned to, avenge her dead son, and the characters of Camp Crystal Lake, Sea Christie and all that, like, he now re-owns all those characters and the title Friday the 13th. How? I don't know, because everybody knows that Sean Cunningham came up with Friday the 13th. He put it in the back of a Variety ad, to raise the money. He raised mob money to make the movie, and basically paid Victor to write this script so he could shoot this film and try to make a quick buck off of it. But lo and behold, the courts have only seen it one way. And they've ruled in Victor's favor twice now, in both circuit courts. I think Sean appealed. I think he's going to appeal again. And so this sort of this lawsuit has, because there isn't somebody that you say, like, okay, who owns what and how does the money get split up? There is no final agreement on that. So even though both lawsuits have now been done, they both, finished in, they were both decided in Victor's favor. Now there's sort of like this, we're in this gray area where they have to come to a settlement to figure out, like, how much of the piece of the pie that Victor gets from this, because obviously Jason Voorhees is not the young boy who drowned and is living at the bottom of Camp Crystal Lake. He is an undead killing machine that comes back from the dead and now it has a hockey mask and all this stuff. So Victor doesn't own that stuff. And, like, the Friday the 13th rights are so split and divided, and Sean is really driving a wedge in between it all because he doesn't think that Victor has earned sort of that keep, which, I mean, at the end of the day, whether or not technically Victor was there, when he coined Friday the 13th, obviously Victor wasn't there when he put Friday the 13th in the back of the Variety ad. But what Victor did do for him was write a script that he didn't have before.
Right.
He came up with characters that he didn't have before. He set up the platform for Sean to succeed. Sean did everything else. Sean directed the film. Sean produced the film. Sean saw that the film got made. He's the one who got the money. Without Sean, none of it happens. Without Victor, it doesn't happen that specific way. Right? I mean, it doesn't tell that specific story. Because let me tell you, Sean Cunningham was going to make anything that was put down in front of him and call it Friday the 13th. It didn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, that was just it. But it just so happened that it was Victor's story. And so, I think after all these years for what Victor created, and what's to say he isn't deserving of a payday like Sean got. So I think that, like, there's a little bit of animosity there. But I mean, if you ask me, like, you're taking out when these two argue over who owns what, they're really counting out the fact that Steve Miner was the one who came up with Jason as we know him today. Joe Zito and Barry Cohen came up with the Tommy Jarvis character. Tom McLaughlin and what he gave to the films. The fact that Kane Hodder and John Carl Buechler and what they did with Part 7 and taking Jason to that next level, and Kane taking the role and going to all those conventions over the years and growing the legend of Friday the 13th, and even Rob Heaton taking Jason to Manhattan and taking Jason to hell and to space and all these different things that sort of like created Jason. Like, Jason isn't just Friday the 13th Part 1. Friday the 13th is Jason 1 through 12. You know what I mean? Like, there's 12 films that all say something very different about Jason, that are all very unique in their own style and create a different, diverse and fan base that you talk to people. Yeah, a lot of people, like, think about it now. Like, you just asked me, like, what's your favorite Friday the 13th Part 6? You know what I mean? like Part 1 barely cracks the top half of my list. So for these guys who, yes, they deserve the credit for everything that they did, at the end of the day, I feel like even though they created the wave that they started, they don't understand it. And they don't understand it even the way some of the other filmmakers in the franchise do, and they especially don't understand it the way the fans do. And honestly, if either one of them were left in charge of a Friday the 13th that was made in the modern era, I don't think that it would connect with fans in any way, shape, or form. And they would make it so clearly different, thinking that they were thinking outside the box, that they would once again at risk of killing the franchise once again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, well, that's a nice little Friday the 13th background story there. I appreciate that.
I wasn't expecting a whole, a whole speech on that.
And definitely, I would definitely suggest that if anybody has any questions about the franchise, that Larry Zerner, who played Shelley in Friday the 13th Part 3, he's actually an entertainment lawyer. He's on Twitter. He always posts about the Friday the 13th franchise, and if you go back through his history, and if you look up some stuff on YouTube, I think he's done some interviews. In fact, I would encourage that you guys maybe reach out to him yourselves and find him and do an interview with him if you really want to go in depth in it. He can really explain the legal sort of the actual. I'm sort of like glancing over it because I barely know how to describe it. He knows the specific things that are going on and why things don't work the way they work and what deals have to be made and all that stuff. I definitely suggest you guys talk to him sometime.
Okay. Yeah, definitely got to do that. What was his name?
Larry Zerner.
Larry Zerner. Okay. I'm going to write that down real quick.
Yeah, Shelley from Part 3. The guy, okay. I mean, the guy who gave Jason his mask. So, I mean...
Gotcha.
Why doesn't Larry get some...
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
The mask.
So, I mean, So, Victor basically just made the story for Part 1. Right?
That's correct.
Completely different story from the entire rest of the series. Like it takes Jason into a whole other realm. So I mean, pay him, something to get him off your back a little bit. But it's like, he doesn't really, I'd give him something for it, but ultimately it should be Sean's series, Sean's franchise for sure.
But even then, it's still, like I said, like Steve Miner's the one who came up with Jason as we know.
Yeah. Right.
Without Shelley giving him that mask, I mean, is Friday the 13th as big as it is today? I can't imagine so. And so I think that, like, if anything, it's sort of stepping back and realizing that, like I said at the beginning, like, films are made by a village of people. Most of those people get paid an hourly wage and then never see another dime after they get done working on the film, even though they're really the ones that without it, the film can't be made. Yeah, I mean, producers are there to raise the money and all those things, but they're not the ones busting their asses out there to actually execute what's on the page. So, there's a real discrepancy in the film industry about like what people get paid and who really benefits in the end from a film when, at the end of the day, who's really putting in the blood, sweat, and tears to get it done, and then who's just kind of sitting back and cashing the checks.
Yeah, good point. It's interesting. Like if you even like some pretty strong horror fans and just your casual horror fans, you ask them who's the killer in Friday the 13th Part 1. A lot of people are going to say Jason. That's just what people know of Friday the 13th is Jason. And so, like you said, Steve Miner, he deserves some of that credit too, as he created Jason that we know right now. And I was it's funny, I was wearing a Michael Myers mask to a Halloween party, and someone came up to me and they're like, "Oh, you came as Jason." I was like, I think everybody just thinks horror is Jason. Any of the slasher icons is Jason. It doesn't matter who it is.
That's the first name that comes to people's heads. He's just so iconic.
Yeah.
And, it's really a shame that there aren't any movies out right now, or like, with Halloween Kills coming back out and Chucky's got a revival, Hellraiser's coming back. There's talk about Nightmare on Elm Street getting a new chance.
Exorcist.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a new film, a new Exorcist. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is getting its own game and a film. And so it really is sort of a shame that in this like new slasher boom, and this renaissance of new remakes of like, you know, because we had that period where Friday the 13th got remade last time. And honestly, I think that the Friday the 13th remake was the first thing that sort of killed Friday the 13th. It did so mediocrely that, you know, there wasn't any incentive for Paramount to give money to it, because Paramount is not in the business of making tens of millions of dollars. Paramount is in the business of making hundreds to billions. If you're not making $100 million profit, Paramount really has no use for that film. You know, I think around the time that you know, towards the tail end of the remakes, because the first horror remakes were pretty good. I mean, you had like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a few of those that did, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars and did really well in the box office. And then you look at the way that Friday the 13th did, and you would think that it would do so much better. And it really didn't. And from a studio standpoint, they're looking at these investments of these $25 million films that they're making. Like I think it was 2009 was, I think, a $19 million budget. You're probably looking at another 20 to 25 in P&A. You know, they marketed the hell out of that thing. So you're looking at them spending between $50,000 and $60,000 before they even take it to the theater. And to put it in as many theaters as they did, how much that cost and all these different things. So by the time they're recouping the cost, I mean, they probably recouped their cost in home video sales, but they really expected Friday the 13th to bring home $100 million, $200 million payday, and it didn't. And so they went back to the drawing board on it. There was no immediate sequel. They had to go back and scrap that one. They went into the found footage area, and, you know, unfortunately, not only were they having trouble finding their footing in the found footage world, Paramount itself was under a lot of turmoil. So during that time, you had a lot of people at the higher up level coming and going, hired and fired. And every time someone was hired and fired, the direction for Friday the 13th changed. In fact, I remember hearing a story, Brad Fuller, who was the producer at Platinum Dunes in charge of Friday the 13th, even said that he dragged his feet during the found footage version because he didn't want that one to get made. So you have like internally people dragging it down because they don't want to make that, and they went to go make Friday the 13th 3D. Both the found footage and the 3D one were both going to be directed by a filmmaker by the name of David Bruckner. There's a film podcast called The Greatest Movies Never Made, where Bruckner talks about the Friday the 13th that he wanted to make, and the script is floating around out there too if anyone ever wants to read it. I honestly think that was the best chance Friday the 13th had, because it was a true blue Friday the 13th. It was just about kids at camp. Jason comes back, starts murdering a bunch of people, and they can't put him down. And that's basically the film. So it was perfect. It didn't try to do too much. It didn't try to do what the remake did, which was reground him and try to make him human again, and then undo it and like get really muddy with the details. It was just like super simple. And I loved it. But they didn't end up making that film. They actually scrapped that idea, brought on another filmmaker by the name of Breck Eisner, who did The Crazies. And he had a version that was really out there. It had Elias in it. It had Pamela in it. It had Jason in it. Jason doesn't show up till page like 69.
Oh, wow.
And it was just a really odd duck of a film. I read that script too. And in fact, it was supposed to come out in 2017. It was slated for October 13th, 2017. And in January of 2017, that film was canceled after the failure of Rings 2. So, as I was saying before, Rings 2, which was about a $25 million film, Friday the 13th, 2017 was supposed to be about a $25 million film. Paramount said, no more $25 million films. You got Blumhouse over here making sub $5 million horror movies and killing it. Like, that's what we want. Or we're just going to make Lord of the Rings or something, you know, Interstellar or whatever else they were going to make. They wanted big budget Hollywood tentpoles that were going to make hundreds of millions of dollars because the studio needed to make that much money. It wasn't going to survive off of Friday the 13th making $10 million for them. So they completely scrapped the film, and that was really when we were in the middle of making Never Hike Alone. Like, we were smack dab in the middle of Never Hike Alone. We had half of the film done. I had just signed Tom Matthews, and then all of a sudden, you know, it was all over the wire. Friday the 13th is canceled. And I was like, fuck that. Like, Friday the 13th didn't cancel.
Right.
Like, we're gonna release Never Hike Alone on Friday the 13th, and we might not be a $20 million film, but I bet you I'll do something in this film that will do something that film could never do.
Yeah.
And that's make fans happy. And so that became the challenge, and that was what I did, and I focused and, you know, really kind of like put my nose to the grindstone that year. And you know, in 2017 on October 13th, you know, there was a Friday the 13th that got released, and it had Tom Matthews in it as Tommy Jarvis. So you know, I would say that, like, the failures of Friday the 13th, as much as I hated to watch them happen, did open up the opportunity for me to make Never Hike Alone, and for it to be as successful as it was, because it opened the door wide open for us.
Yeah.
And we took advantage. And, you know, there are fans out there who love us. There are fans out there who hate us, who think that, like, how can they do this? They should be sued. And, you know, this, that, and the other thing. I'm just sitting here like, do you, like, hate fun? Are you just mad that this exists? Like,
right.
I'm sorry, like, but hey, I could have, like, taken that money and, like, gone on vacation. Like, I could still be working in animation right now and doing all this stuff. And, like, we could not have, like, if I didn't do this, quite frankly, I don't think that there is another Friday the 13th fan film out there that would have been challenged enough to even try to reach what we did. And we would have got a lot more of the same. And these fan films would have flown under the radar. People probably wouldn't have known they existed, and when they watch them would think that they're pretty typical fan film fare. And I think that, you know, Friday, you know, when Never Hike Alone came out, it set a new precedent for saying, listen, all of the tools that we need as filmmakers to tell a comprehensive and cinematic story are at our fingertips right now. And if you can come up with a story, and you can get some really good visual effects, and you can get somebody to play a good Jason in your film, then you might be able to reach the Friday the 13th audience, because they are so starved for material. They'll basically watch anything at this point. If it's got a hockey mask on it, they're going to show up. And I think so now we've seen, you know, countless fan films come out, some better, some worse, and, all in a plotted effort by fans who are coming together and trying to do the best for the franchise. And it's put me in contact with lots of filmmakers from around the world. Like, I got to work on the Jason Rising project. I don't know if you guys have seen that one yet.
Yeah, I just saw I hadn't seen it, but I just was looking at the Womp Stomp YouTube page, and I saw that came out. And you were a producer, correct?
Yeah, I was a producer, co-writer.
Yeah.
And I have a bit part in the film as well, as Officer Playboy. So I'll let you figure out. So that was made by good friends of mine, and you'll see why when you watch the film. Some good friends of mine, Carl Winnery and James Sweet, who I met through this. You know, they were big fans of Friday of Never Hike Alone, and obviously they're big fans of Friday the 13th. And they were making their own film, and Never Hike Alone had a success, so they reached out. Well, we reached out to each other, I think, just as mutual, like, hey, really like what you're doing, and, you know, if you ever have any questions, just let me know. And, you know, if you have ever any questions turned into, hey, I think I have some ideas for your movie. You're looking for a co-writer, like, I can come up and help out. And so, like, I went up to Portland for over the span of 2 years, like, through the pandemic, everything. And we ended up making this crazy Friday the 13th movie, which is just like, you know, ours is, like I said, a retcon from everything from 1 to 8. Like, this is the new Friday the 13th Part 9. Theirs is a retcon to everything 1 to 4. So, like, it's basically a new sequel to the final chapter that doesn't go the Universal Monsters route like Tom McLaughlin did, but it takes it more of a Sam Raimi Evil Dead
nice
kind of wackadoo kind of world, which is cool, which I'm not going to spoil anything right now because it's in the trailers, but the big kind of core draw to Jason Rising, what drew me to the project, was the fact that not only does Jason rise from the grave to continue his killing spree, but he's actually risen from the grave by his mother as her own undead headless corpse that comes back from the dead to raise her son from the dead, and they both go on a killing spree.
Oh, nice.
Which I was like, I don't know how you guys are going to do this, but I want a front row seat. I want to be there when this happens.
Go on a killing spree?
No, it's Jason and his mother's body with no head running around. The body comes. It's like evil. That's why I said it's like Evil Dead. The head is there too. The head is around.
Yeah.
But for the most part, her body is walking around without a head on it.
Okay.
And so a lot of, again, like people like take it way too seriously. They're like, wait, how does the body moving? And it's like, why are you questioning these things?
Yeah,
Just
come
go
on.
with it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be logical. We're not looking for logic too much here. That's funny.
Yeah. So it's very, to me, it was very entertaining. Unlike Never Hike Alone and Never Hike in the Snow, it was definitely centered around like big body count. There's stories about it's like set in modern day Wessex County, many years after the final chapter, and a set of Wessex County convicts from the corrections farm escape the farm and end up hiding out in Camp Crystal Lake so they can escape and make their escape. Of course, that raises Jason and his mother from the dead, and this set of basically a team of the local sheriff and his deputy and a set of federal marshals are going in to root out these criminals and end up sort of stumbling into a little bit bigger of a case than they originally intended. And I always said that it was a great sort of callback to more of a Predator. So it's sort of like Predator meets Friday the 13th, where you have the cops going in. They're a very focused team. They have a very specific goal, but when they get there, the goal changes. All of a sudden, it's not about the mission anymore. It's about this bigger entity that's there that's now hunting them down, and they got to get out of the woods before they're all taken out one by one.
Okay, yeah, I see the connection there.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, definitely gonna have to watch that. I saw it on the YouTube channel and I was like, "What's this? This is different." So yeah, definitely gonna watch that. So okay, Womp Stomp. Just a couple more questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
So Womp Stomp, what is that? Where'd that name come from?
Womp Stomp is based off of basically a cheat code from an old Star Wars game. I think it was Star Wars Battle something for Nintendo 64, and the cheat code was Wampa Stompa. And so you type in Wampa Stompa and you become the ice creature from Hoth, and you would break out of the cage in the level and just run around and start smashing stormtroopers. And so Wampa Stompa was an internet handle that I used on like America Online when I first logged on. Like that was my username, Wampa Stompa. And eventually I went and see, like then, social media started to evolve. I got onto Instagram and Wampa Stompa wasn't available. And so I was trying different combinations of things, and what ended up coming up was something called Womp Stomp. And I was like, oh, Womp Stomp, Wampa Stomp. Yeah, that all works. And so I used that, and I used that mostly for my photography. And when I started to develop Never Hike Alone, I realized that it needed my own kind of like film handle. So I just added films to the end of it. It became Womp Stomp Films. And so that's where Womp Stomp Films came from.
All right, cool. It's funny.
Game.
Yeah, it's funny. Like usually it's stories like that where it's like something kind of silly that turns into something cool.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Also, we've talked about quite a few of the Friday the 13th films, but we haven't mentioned Freddy vs. Jason. How do you feel about that? Because that's one of my favorite horror films of all time. So you're a huge Friday fan. I want to know what you think of that one.
I mean, it's sort of. I mean, for a Friday fan, it's fine. It's sort of disappointing from the fact that I think that we all sort of. Like, we expected Kane Hodder to be in the role. We didn't expect Jason to look like a giant homeless teddy bear. And sort of when you go back and you watch the film, it's very Scooby-Dooey.
Yeah.
And sort of, it's almost like, I guess it needs to be a pop culture film, but at the same time, it sort of became such a pop culture film that it ruined any sort of the horror elements around it. I remember liking it when it first came out. And I mean, I'll still enjoy it if it's on. It's just, I think, I don't know. It's just,
I wanted to ask you.
I think, it's a,
I wanted to ask you.
It's a film made by somebody who doesn't really understand Friday the 13th.
Right.
You can always tell, like Ronnie Yu doesn't seem like a big Friday fan.
Yeah.
I think that, I honestly do think the story is actually pretty brilliant. The fact that, Freddie uses Jason to sort of get himself back into the minds of the people of Springwood. I thought that part was cool. I thought a lot of that was good. I just felt that tonally, it just starts to really dip in a lot of places, and especially going back and watching it feels really dated.
Yeah.
The fact that they put a Destiny's Child in it, it's insulting. It's insulting. It's, you know what I mean? Like we can't even take it seriously, and I feel like it just sort of like those are the things that sort of kind of take away from films, and they, like I said, they become like almost becomes like a studio joke in a way, versus like what the fans actually wanted. But at the same time, like, you know, pretty happy with the results. Pretty happy, you know, that Jason sort of kind of, you know, there was a good fight. There's some cool things. It was just a tonally odd film for Friday the 13th and even Nightmare on Elm Street. But there are certain elements that are pretty cool. Not a huge fan of Jason being scared of water, even if it's in a dream sequence.
Yeah.
Just, you know, there's just certain things that sort of like that bug me about it. But it's definitely a fun film. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
I would say I have more fun watching Jason X.
Okay.
Just because I know what I'm getting into, and the expectations are so low that it's really hard to like, to like let me down. I feel like I loved Freddy vs. Jason when it came out, and I think the more I watched it over the years, the less rewatch factor it had, the more I watched it, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because, you know, I feel like a lot of Freddie fans like it, and then a lot of Jason fans are a little, you know, turned off by it because it to me it feels more like a Nightmare on Elm Street film. I feel like Freddie is kind of more of at the forefront, and Jason's kind of more of like just the tool that Freddie is using. And so it doesn't,
even though Jason gets all the kills.
Yeah, but it doesn't do Jason justice, you know. And then he's kind of like a hero too.
I mean, it's fine. Like, you know, they wanted to make him sympathetic, and I think that part of it too. Sort of the other part of it too. It was like, it was comical. You know what I mean? Like, even the deaths were comical.
Yeah, they were.
It wasn't like, oh my god, I'm shitting my pants right now. Like, everything was sort of like a joke. It was closing the guy in the bed and stabbing him a bunch of times, and oh hey dad, and then his head pops off out of nowhere, and it was like, man, this was like silly as fuck. Like, the hell is going on? You know, it wasn't like, oh my god, Jason's like, you know, even when the way Jason moved and the way he looked, it was, you know, for me, like, Jason, the way he looks is like 90% of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, if Jason doesn't look extremely scary, like Part 6, he looks scary as hell in most of that film.
Yeah.
You know, even with the big yellow mitts, like, it doesn't matter. Like, there's something about Jason, the stature and the way that it's like, oh my god, if you get in the path of this thing, he's going to rip you to shreds. He literally ripped that dude's heart out of his chest. Like, I'm scared. Like, he will get me. You know, like Part 7, like, he will hunt me down. Like, Part 4, like, he's coming through the door. There's no stopping him. Like, all that stuff, like, they have, even Part 8 to a certain degree, like, there's still a good look to them. And there's this sense that they're always kind of, and like, you don't want to get in contact with them. Like, I wasn't scared of the Jason that was in Freddy vs. Jason.
Right.
I was sort of like, every time he's on screen, I'm like, oh man, he looks so goofy. Like, oh, that mask looks weird. You know?
Yeah, he's kind of more of
it was like when I start to,
more of like a robotic zombie Jason in Freddy vs.
Yeah, it was
Jason.
Frankenstein. I mean, it was definitely a big Frankenstein sort of look to him, and it wasn't like Frankenstein from Part 6, the way that sort of like CJ sort of brought that intensity because he was so powerful.
Right.
He just didn't have any power behind him.
Yeah. Even
though like he would touch Freddie and he'd go flying like 50 feet across the camp. Like that was there. You know, we took a little bit of like a nod. There's actually a nod to Freddy vs. Jason Never Hike Alone when Jason backhands Kyle and goes flying through. So there's a little bit like, I mean, Jason, they did do a good job with the stunt work and stuff like that. But I think, I think fans, when they thought about Freddy vs. Jason, when I first started talking about it in the '80s, that they were thinking about something a little bit more darker. And you know, got made in 2003, and it was the world where, you know, the studio system really took over all that stuff, and it became a $60 million production versus
Right.
some type of horror film that was a little bit more in the horror world. It was made for a bigger audience.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love that movie. But
everybody to each his own.
Fun and silly, but yeah, it's definitely up there for for both franchises actually.
Yeah.
For me, but yeah. So.
Okay, Joel, did you have any more questions for Vinny here, or are we gonna call it a day?
So you said that you're working on Never Hike Alone 2. Do you have estimated year? I guess is the one that's you're planning.
I mean, the goal would be this year.
This year,
the goal would be for October 13th this year.
Okay.
And so we're finishing up the Ghost Cut Blu-rays right now. That's sort of one of the things I'm working on while I'm home. Then we'll step into a fundraise for Never Hike Alone 2. That will be sort of the determination to see how much we raise, to see what we can actually do. Then we would shoot it over the summer. We would put it together by early fall, and then release it like on the 5-year anniversary of Never Hike Alone on October 13th, 2017. In 2022, and that would be the final entry, and that would be it. And then I would be able to sort of, walk away from Friday the 13th telling my complete story and not having to ask the studios for a single damn thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Awesome. That'll be a really cool week to get that and Halloween Ends on the same week.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Okay, awesome. Well, we will be contributing to this fundraiser whenever it comes to be, so you can count on that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, it was great talking with you. I think me and Joel both learned things about Friday the 13th that we didn't previously know.
I learned quite a bit.
You have quite a wealth of knowledge of this franchise, so appreciate that.
I'm
okay.
a pretty big nerd when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and something I did want to say before we end. You were talking about like all your friends that were working on it, and you got some of the bigger names from the franchise to help you out with it, and you worked on Jason Rising with some other people. I feel like the horror community is just kind of like that. We want to help each other out, and we've had some people on our podcast, that we didn't think we'd be able to talk to, but just everybody, the love of horror is what trumps everything, I think. And so
totally,
yeah. So that's just there's no other genre that can do that. And so it's really cool.
That, like, definitely horror, sci-fi, like there's definitely there's a lot of community in this in this sort of genre, and you feel it when you go to the conventions. Like, I never used to go to conventions, and I didn't start going to conventions until after Never Hike Alone, and I really feel like I was missing out. I feel like I've met a community of people that we all get along. We all have similar upbringings. We all have similar childhoods. We all got into horror movies way too early, and we love them, and we love to talk about it. And and what's really cool about horror films is that, like, or horror fans, I should say, is that, like, when you talk to a horror fan, it's not like all they talk about is horror films. Like, yeah, we do, but we can talk about any genre. Like, we're just fans of film.
Right.
And it's so funny that the biggest fans of film happen to be sort of horror fans as well, because those films are so out there that only a lover of film could love them.
Yes,
normal people sort of look at them and go like, what is this stuff? And it's like, you just realize that it's sort of this great playground for both as a filmmaker and as a consumer to say, like, this is where I'm going to go watch the wildest shit I'm ever going to see. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
All right, Vinny, we're going to let you go. Thank you again for coming on. We'll probably reach out to you later and hopefully get you to talk about Never Hike Alone 2, later on after that comes out. And so
sounds like a plan.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to sign off here. This has been our interview with Vincent DiSanti, and this has been Scare Talk.
Sleep tight.
Don't let Vinny bite. That's how we end them all.
Watch out,
so,
though.
yeah.